Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, my name is Syari Lailatul Awalia. I am from Universitas Pekalongan. Here I will present the result of my research entitled Students' Ability in Reading Comprehensions of Recount Text, a case study of at the 10th grade of SMKN1 Pemalang in the academic year of 2022-2023. The first is Introduction. As an international language, English is one of the subjects studied by high school or vocational high school students. Students are expected to be able to understand various ideas, information, opinions, and feelings through oral or written communication. SMKN1 Pemalang is one of the state vocational schools in Pemalang. As a formal institution, the school also provides English lessons to students, especially reading skill. English is very important because it is an international language and as a means of communication and mastery of technology. Seeing the condition of students who may have proficiency in English, especially in law reading, makes research want to explore students' ability. Reading is one of the language competencies that has an important role where this competence is acquired to develop other people's ideas through the form of books or writing. Reading is a perceptive skill that is transactional between the reader and the researcher or an interactive process between the reader and the text. There is a meaning of live reading, namely where reading can provide knowledge for the reader. Students' ability is a special talent or skill to do something well in student. And then according to Tarigan, reading comprehensions is a kind of reading that aims to understand literary standard or norm, critical review, written drama, and fictional patterns. The term of recount text has the purpose of describing an incident or event that occurred in the past, for example, accident, activity reports, and so on. The recount is a type of text that is often used and presented in journal, diaries, personal letters, biography or autobiography, travel reports, police reports, sport reports, history, and so on. Not all students can read reading well, especially in reading the context. Many students find it difficult to understand the text and do not understand the meaning of the text. So the researchers use recount text in measuring students' ability in reading comprehensions. The researchers conducted a study entitled Students' Ability in Reading Comprehensions of Recount Text, a case study at the 10th grade of SMKN1 Pemalang in the 2022-2023 academic year. Next is research method. In this study, the researchers use qualitative research. Qualitative research method is a method or research method that emphasizes analysis or descriptive. A qualitative approach is a research procedure that produces descriptive data in the form of written or spoken word of people and observable behavior. The researchers conducted research at SMKN1 Pemalang, which is located on Gatot Subroto Street, number 31, Pemalang, Regency. Data source used in this study include primary data source obtained from the first data source through data collection procedures and techniques in the form of interview and test, as well as secondary data source obtained from indirect source, usually in the form of documentation data and important archive. The secondary data in this study were taken from books, journals, and articles, as well as relevant previous research. Determination of data source on interview was carried out purposefully, namely selected with certain consideration and goals. Determination of the sample in qualitative research is not based on statistical calculation, so that the result for qualitative research is the compilation of information acquisition with a variety or of existing variation, not the number of data sources. In collecting data, in this study, the researchers use interview and test techniques. Both techniques are used to obtain mutually supporting and complementary data and information about students' ability to reading comprehensions at SMKN1 Malang. In qualitative research, the instrument data collection are humans, namely the researchers themselves or other people who assist research. The researcher asks for help from other people to collect data called interviewers. In collecting data, research use instruments in the form of interview and tests. In this study, the analysis technique used in descriptive data analysis technique by collecting factual data and describing it. The data came from all the information obtained from the result of interview and test result through several stages. After data collection and data recording, the researcher conducted an interaction analysis consisting of data reduction, data presentation, and verification. The researcher used technical analysis in Miles and Haberman model. Next is finding and discussion. The researchers also use multiple choice test instrument, especially on students' ability to reading comprehensions of the context. This test was in the form of 10 multiple choice questions taken from several indicators, namely the main idea of the context in the form of two items, the generic structure in the context in the form of one item, the purpose of the context in the form of two items, as well as the linguistic characteristic of the context is the form of two items. Result of multiple choice tests. Class 10 students majoring in MPL Battery at SMKN1 Pemalang for the 2022-2023 academic year did poorly in the reading comprehension test, with an average of 57.74% or category poor. The results show that of the 31 students in the study, 7 students were fair at the reading context, and then 16 students were poor at reading comprehensions of the context, and 8 students were very poor in reading comprehensions of the context. After finding the score of the students' test result, the researcher proceeded to further analysis using the presentation of score on reading skill of the context using the formula. Each student's score in reading comprehensions of the context was analyzed using a percentage score to obtain a descriptive percentage score. The researcher gave the percentage of data based on aspects of reading skills, namely understanding the main ideas of the context, recognizing the communicative functions of the context according to social function, recognize the generic structure of the context, recognize grammatical word based on the language features of the context, recognize the meaning of the word based on the context, and then the context references and the context information. The average result of understanding the main idea of the context was 72.04%. It can be concluded that these criteria are good. The average result of understanding specific informations of the context was 51.61%. It can be concluded that the criteria are poor. The average result of understanding the generic structure of the context was 38.71%. It can be concluded that these criteria are very poor. The average result of understanding linguistic feature of in the context was 37.10%. It can be concluded that these criteria are very poor. The average result of understanding the purpose of the context was 72.58%, it can be concluded that these criteria are good. The interview instrument is aimed at answering the problem formulation related to what difficulties students face in reading comprehensions of the context, which contain 5 interview questions taken from several indicators related to aspects of reading comprehensions, namely mechanical skill and comprehension skill, and to find out what factor affect the ability reading comprehensions of students, which contains 4 interview questions taken from several indicators related to factors that influence reading comprehensions, namely psychological factor, intellectual factors, environmental factor, and psychological factors. At the analysis stage carried out by the researcher, it is to make a list of questions used for the interview and informants. In analyzing data, the researcher used data reduction, data display, and conclusion drawing or verification. The interview was conducted by asking a number of questions. Then the researcher conducted the interview by recording all the environment answers using a mobile phone. Then the researchers recorded the result of the environment answer that had been recorded on the cell phone. Before analyzing the data that the researcher obtained, it was first collected according to the type of data available. After data was collected according to their respective types, then the researcher analyzed data with a method to describe and interpret the existing data. After the data is analyzed, conclusions were drawn by inductive thinking, namely departing from specific conclusion and then drawing general conclusion. The result of the analysis of interview with students are as follows. First, on question, can you read a text, especially context, by understanding various linguistic elements such as phrase, clause patterns, and sentences? 20 students answered that they had not been able to read a text, especially the context, according to the types of linguistic elements. 8 students answered that they were able to read a text, especially the context, by understanding the types of linguistic elements, and then 3 students answered that they could read and understand a text, especially the context, by paying attention to the types of linguistic elements. And the second is on question, can you read a text, especially the context, by paying attention to the correspondence of spelling and sound patterns? 11 students answered that they could not read text, especially the context, based on spelling and sound patterns properly. And then 20 students answered that they could reading text, especially the context based on spelling and sound patterns well. On question, how is your reading speed in reading a text, especially context? 20, 12 students answered that their speed in reading a text was at a slow speed because the text was in English. So they had to know the meaning of each vocabulary first. And then the 19 student answered that their speed in reading a text was at moderate speed by paying attention to the vocabulary in each sentence. On question, can you understand the meaning and grammar used in the context? 18 students answered that they could not understand the meaning and grammar used in the context, and the 13 students answered that they could understand the meaning and grammar used in the context. On question, if given any context, can you understand well the meaning contained in the text? 12 students answered that they could not properly understand the meaning contained in a text, especially context, because they need to interpret the whole text before they could understand it. And then the 19 students answered that they could understand well the meaning contained in a text, especially the context. On question, Do you think physical health affect students in reading and understanding a text? 22 students answered that according to them physical health could influence them a reading and understanding text. And then the 9 students answered that according to them physical health did not affect them in reading and understanding text. On question, can you understand if the teacher explained materials related to reading comprehensions of a text? 20 students answered that they could understand if the teacher explained material related to reading comprehensions of text. And then the 11 students answered that they did not quite understand if they only got material explanation related to reading comprehensions of text. So they had to look for other reference source first to understand the material. And on question, does your home environment support you in reading comprehensions a text? For students answered that their home environment was normal towards supporting them in learning to read and understand text. And the 12 students answered that their home environment was not supportive or not supportive enough to support them in learning to read and understand text for various reasons. For example, because they live in a village, so their home environment is still unfamiliar with text, especially in English. 15 students answered that their home environment support them in learning to read and understand text. And the last questions of interview. Do you have motivation and interest in reading comprehensions of a text? 18 students answered that they had motivation and interest in reading comprehensions of text. 13 students answered that they had little or no motivation and interest in reading comprehensions text for various reasons. For example, it was difficult to understand an English text. The last is conclusion. The first conclusion, the result of data analysis show that the students' ability to reading comprehensions of recount text has a poor percentage, which is around 57.74% or category poor. And the second conclusion, the result of interview related to difficulties faced by students in reading comprehensions of recount text can be concluded as follows based on the aspect of mechanical skills and comprehension skill. The answer is that almost 50% of the 31 students answered that they could not yet understand a text, especially recount text for various reasons, such as they don't understand too deeply the material of the context. According to them, English text is a text that is difficult to understand, so they are less able to read and understand a text, especially context. And the third conclusion, it can be concluded that based on the result of research and analysis of students' ability in reading comprehensions of recount text in class 10 MPLB 3 SMKN 1 Pemalang, the results were not good because they still did not understand and had difficulties in learning about reading comprehensions of a text, especially recount text. That's all for my presentation. If you have any questions, please fill in the comments column. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.